Hello. Um, this is a spur of the moment video, but I think it's actually someone's just written a comment on one of my videos, and it's actually prompted me to make this because I think it's relevant. She may or may not watch this video, but anyway, Anna Dunham on my video about Bruce Ismay, the chairman of White Star Line, made some rather ignorant comments, I believe, and her comments though have got me thinking about this subject. Basically, I'd made a video about Bruce Ismay, the chairman of White Star Line, and in that video I argued that on some level he has been unfairly scapegoated for everything that went wrong with the Titanic. Now, I'm from Belfast, so the Titanic is a subject that's interested me my whole life, and every film adaptation I've seen has basically vilified Ismay as an arrogant, snobbish um, man who put his life before women and children. Um, First thing I would say about this, I'm not going to make a whole repeat of the video, but I'll just summarize this. None of us were there, so we can't know absolutely what happened, but I very much doubt that the caricature of Ismay pushing past women and children has any truth whatsoever. It is true that he boarded a lifeboat, and it is true that steerage women perished, but the problem with the Titanic was one of a lack of lifeboats in general. Nobody should have died in that disaster. Um, that was manslaughter. Now, as chairman of White Star Line, of course, he should have held some culpability, but I can't help but think there was an element of scapegoating one man for the entire disaster. White Star Line was actually let off the hook from any sort of negligence whatsoever, but Ismay was vilified for the rest of his life. He went to live in the Republic of Ireland, and he actually said he would rather that children walk past his house and call him a card than to resume his responsibilities with White Star Line. I think that's how he put it. But anyway, this very ignorant woman came on my thread, and instead of coming up with an intelligent argument, all she said was, "It's me pushed past women and children. He was a coward." And that bothers me because there's no evidence whatsoever that he done that. And that sort of mentality, I think, is quite prevalent when it comes to the Titanic, and Hollywood absolutely has not helped. Every film about the Titanic has lazily vilified this man. And I'll admit, when I was younger, I took that view as well. And it's one of the biggest problems that powerful film directors can basically assassinate someone's character. And you know, Ismay is quite an easy scapegoat because he was wealthy, he was a caricature of the sort of upper class Edwardian gentleman. So he was an easy scapegoat from that point of view to sort of demonize one individual for all the social problems of the day. I'm not saying Ismay was above reproach. I'm not saying that some of the criticism wasn't valid. I just think it's unfair to demonize one man for everything that went wrong with the Titanic. Now, if it's true that Captain Smith listened to the suggestions of a passenger, that is partly Smith's fault for not putting his foot down. You know, in the end of the day, the captain of a ship has ultimate authority, so that says something about Smith. But of course, Smith perished, so Smith was seen as a hero captain going down with his ship, and Ismay was vilified. I think that's a bit unfair. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about that. I covered it in the video. What I want to talk about is the issue of this notion, this chivalrous notion of women and children first, and my thoughts on it. Firstly, a bit of history. This concept began, or goes back to, I believe it was either 1851 or 1861. There was a maritime disaster in the Irish Sea. There was a ship called the HMS Birkenhead. It was mostly military personnel, but there were women and children on board as well. There was actually no laws of the sea at the time, or indeed now, that actually directed that women and children should be saved first. But those sailors took the initiative, and they believed it was the right thing to do. So ever since that incident, the concept of women and children first has been something that has, especially at sea, it has been something that has been seen to be the right thing to do. And even recently, when we saw the Costa Concordia disaster, that has been an issue. Incidentally, there was a major tragedy today in the Mediterranean. I'm going to make another video about that because I believe it's such an important issue that it requires an independent video. But we'll bear that in mind. But with the whole concept of women and children first, firstly, I can understand children. I've no sort of issue with that because children have the rest of their lives ahead of them. That is a principled humanitarian concept, and I think everyone would agree with that. It would take a pretty hard-hearted person not to agree that children should be prioritized. I believe that disabled people should be prioritized, and I believe that elderly people should be prioritized. But there does need to be a debate about why should let's give a scenario, right? Why should a 30-year-old able-bodied healthy woman be put on a pedestal where her life is more important than the 30-year-old able-bodied 30-year-old man? Just to give equilibrium sort of comparison. Now, personally, I think that health and safety should be to a level whereby nobody's life is gambled on. I believe that all passengers should be saved on a ship. Obviously, with the tragedy today, and I'll try not to bring that too much into this video. I'm going to make a video about that. This still happens whereby ships are overcrowded, but the thing about the Titanic, it wasn't actually overcrowded. In fact, it wasn't to full capacity. There could have been, I believe its full capacity was something like, don't quote me on this, I'm not 100% sure, but I think its full capacity was 2,800 and it was 2,500. No, 2,200 were on board, so it actually wasn't at full capacity. And another ironic thing was, actually, by the standards of the day, the Titanic wasn't actually breaking any existing laws of that time. In retrospect, of course, we know it was a complete disgrace, that there was only 16 lifeboats. Each lifeboat could only hold 80 people. A lot of those lifeboats were being sent off half full. I think there's a valid point to be made that Lightoller, believe he was second officer Lightoller. He does deserve some of the culpability for that because he was making the order. There's another thing though that the officers appear to be taking that women and children first concept in different ways. One officer took it to mean women and children only. Another officer, and I forget who, I believe it was Murdoch, took the second order that it was women and children first. Now there's a difference. That second order meant that men could be via the orders saved second. And I don't want to focus too much on the Titanic. I want to focus on this principle in general. Again, why should an able-bodied woman's life be considered more important than an able-bodied man's life? Now, this is an area I don't actually blame feminism, because I don't think that it is so much feminists that have argued that. I believe that is something that actually goes back to, especially seen in the Victorian and Edwardian eras, of this sort of chivalrous concept that women should be treated as vulnerable. Um, but we hear this all the time, even today when there's a big tragedy. For example, if there's a plane crash or if there's a terrorist attack, we hear something along the lines of women were among the victims. Now, I believe that if we are really to think about egalitarianism, then we have to examine this and examine, is it still justified in 2015 to be talking in these sort of terms? For me, this is, I've mixed views on it because the egalitarian side of me says no. If we really believe that men and women should be treated equally, then we should see a man's life as just as important as a woman's life. And there should be a situation whereby everybody is treated as a human life, as equally important. Another part of me is a little bit old-fashioned, and I have to say my own position on this is a little bit paradoxical because if there was a big tragedy that I was personally involved in, I probably would be very concerned for my female friends, probably my female family members as well. So I guess I partly endorse that view, even though it's like my brain is telling me that it's not fair, but my heart and I guess an old-fashioned part of me is sort of thinking, you know, and I think most men probably have this to some extent, this chivalrous notion. So far from the notion that men don't care about women, I think the exact opposite is true. I think most men have, at least to some extent, a chivalrous notion. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. However, I do think that there is a problem when the media, for example, starts talking in terms that male lives are expendable. I think that is a very big problem. And as a male, as a human being, I think it's wrong. Um, I think it comes down to the notion that women are more vulnerable. The average woman is more vulnerable than the average man because they're physically weaker, generally speaking. This isn't a universal rule. There are some women who are very capable of looking after themselves. I suspect most women actually, but there are women that are physically stronger. But I would also suspect the feminist position on this is somewhat mixed because there will be feminists who believe the idea of chivalry is patronizing, and for them, their notion is it patronizes women. But for a lot of guys, it's wait a second, why are our lives worth less? So a lot of people would probably take issue with it, but for different reasons. Um, Personally, I just think the common sense approach should be that in terms of transport, there should be a health and safety standard so that everyone is safe. There shouldn't be a situation whereby, I mean, there's this sort of moral game that I've heard of whereby the question is this: if you're in a hot air balloon and the hot air balloon needs to lose weight in order to stay afloat, and then you name all these different types of people, who would you throw off first? It's a very morbid sort of game, and it says a lot about human nature. Now, I remember playing that. This was in the job center actually when I was on a back to work program, and the advisor had brought this game up. I think she was trying to pass the time. Um, and I remember there was a lot of questions like one person is a millionaire, one person is AIDS researcher, one person is etc. 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 And you had to basically pick and choose who lives and who dies. Um, it's very, I think, cold-blooded that there would be this sort of scenario where you make choices on human life like that. Um, I think there's a tendency in us that we always sort of think, well, who is vulnerable, who is not. Like, I'll take myself on as an example. I am a generally healthy, able-bodied young man. Um, I'm not disabled. I'm I'm not elderly. I'm obviously not a child. So in that sort of, but I'm single as well. That's another issue. Single men are especially targeted for being expendable because they're not seen as having to provide for a family. So if there was a disaster, I would be one of the first to go. Is that fair? Is it? And if you're, anyone watching this video, let me know. So I sort of have mixed views. Personally, I guess my position is somewhat paradoxical because personally, I mean, say for example, I had a girlfriend. Um, I wouldn't go along those guys who would be so sort of, in that sense, I would be a bit old-fashioned and I would be chivalrous and I would want to protect her. That would be my male instinct taking over. But in terms of how it's covered, for example, in the press, too often we seem to get the impression that men are expendable. I don't actually think that's the fault of feminism, although feminism has been guilty of showing a callous attitude to male suffering, but I don't think we can blame feminism solely for that. It is also partly traditional male notions. And I'm talking here about a patriarchal society. I disagree with MRAs who say that no patriarchy ever existed. I don't agree with that. I think there was some sort of patriarchy. And I think it was partly responsible for this notion that if you are a man and you survive a disaster, then you should feel shame. And it was also comes down to the White Feather campaign in World War One. Of course, at that time, um, men were sent off in their dozens to be massacred at the Somme or Passchendaele, and if they didn't go, they were presented with a white feather for being cards. The whole notion of cowardice seems to be something that is uniquely placed on men. Women are rarely, if ever, accused of cowardice. And yet, if we're going to really apply the logic of equilibrium, then surely women are capable of cowardice as well. If a girl gang, this is just an example, if a girl gang picks on someone in a bullying manner, surely that is cowardice, i.e., that it's easy to do because you're in a mob. Surely that's a form of cowardice. Surely any sort of bullying, whether it be from men or women, is a sort of cowardice. Um, surely, if a woman, for example, backstabs someone, and they pretend to be friends with that person, and then they go and stab them behind the back, and they say malicious things about the person, and they remain anonymous. Surely that's cowardice. So, if we're really, really going to instill a notion of equilibrium, then maybe certain concepts of chivalry do need to go out the window. Another thing I'll say about chivalry, partly as a result of feminism, there's actually a backlash against it from a lot of women because I've been in situations where I've ended up feeling rather awkward and embarrassed because I've tried to do the right thing and it's been taken the wrong way. I've been in situations where it's been a certain social situation, and I know that a girl that I maybe have been talking to or whatever has is going to walk home and it's the evening. So there's been occasions where I've offered to accompany her just to do the right thing and make sure that she's safe. Anyway, on one occasion, the girl in question ended up embarrassing me. She just said, "Oh, I can look after myself. I know karate or something like that." And that was all very well, but she done it in a way to sort of embarrass me in front of other people, and I didn't like that one little bit. I remember being pretty pissed off at the time because I thought I'd been trying to be a decent guy and do the right thing. It could be because some women believe there is a malicious concept, and in that regard, I think feminism is partly to blame, because feminism has led women to believe the assumption that all men are potential rapists. Therefore, if a man has good intentions, then it is perceived as being something to do with negative intentions. I understand women need to be cautious, but I think you can reject a man's goodwill politely. So, for example, if you're a woman and you would rather look after yourself or you'd rather carry your own bags or whatever, that's fine. But at least be civil about it. At least be polite when the man in question is clearly trying to do a decent thing. I'm not talking about if a guy is clearly coming onto you and clearly has other intentions. But if he's just trying to be a decent man, then don't be a bitch about it. And I'm not saying all women are. I'm just saying that some women are. And I've no respect for those sort of women. To hell with them. Um, I would also tie this into the harassment issue. A project like Everyday Sexism says that women suffer harassment all the time. Now, I have no doubt that there is harassment out there. I've no doubt whatsoever. There are men who don't give a shit about how women feel and do make women uncomfortable, and that needs to be condemned. But I also believe we're getting to a point where men basically have to watch every single thing they say, because even a compliment would be perceived as harassment. And there is a problem here. Um, Traditionally speaking, men are expected to make the first move. I think most people would agree with that. So, what exactly is a young man supposed to do? If he sees a girl that he likes, he thinks she's attractive, he wants to approach her, um, what's he supposed to do? Is he supposed to just stay silent and not take an opportunity in case he's accused of harassment? Is he supposed to wait for her to make the first move, which she won't do? I think that's ridiculous. Um, I think the ideal situation would be that he approaches her, he offers to buy her a drink. If she says no, politely, hopefully, then he should take no for an answer and walk away. But some women will not do that. They will then treat the guy like a potential rapist, and everything needs to be a common sense basis. And it's sort of two problems. I just think that men are being put in a situation whereby anything they say or do will be accused of. In other words, they're being put in a no-win situation. So how on earth are men supposed to find a partner if they don't make moves? And then women turn around and complain, "Oh, all men are the same. Why can't I get a boyfriend?" Maybe it's because you make men feel guilty every time they do approach you. And just to be clear, because I don't want to be misinterpreted, I am in no way saying this is the same as actual harassment. Harassment is wrong, okay? If a guy comes on to a girl, a young woman, and she clearly isn't interested, then he should take no for an answer. Now, I have approached women before and I've been rejected. And you know what? I accepted it and I moved on. And that's fine. Okay, I was disappointed. It was, I didn't like it, but I accepted it and moved on. And I have to say, in those circumstances, the girls were decent about it. They weren't cruel. They weren't, you know. But some women aren't. Some women will just make guys feel like shit for the sake of it. And then the same women will turn around and whinge about not getting a man. And it's just, anyway, I've tied in a lot of issues to this video. Let me know your thoughts. I'll conclude with this. I believe that in terms of how society deals with this, there needs to be genuine egalitarianism. We should stop seeing men as expendable because they're not. If a young man, for example, gets assaulted, society should be just as sympathetic as if it was a young woman getting assaulted. And actually, some statistics indicate that young men are much more likely to be the victim of a violent assault than young women, although young women are more likely to be victims of a sexual assault. But the fact of the matter is, anyone who's a victim of crime should be treated with sympathy. Um, but in terms of how individuals look at it, then personally, I, I just have I don't think I'm going to change my own approach. If I see a woman struggling with baggage, more likely than not, I'll do the decent thing because I believe that most women are decent, and I believe that most women would be grateful. They would either politely say no or they would appreciate the help. I think it is actually only a minority of women that are bitches, and I believe those women give other women a bad image, just like the guys who harass women give men a bad image. The truth is, actually, most people are quite decent and they have the right notions. Um, Personally, still have somewhat of a chivalrous, old-fashioned outlook, and I would continue to, treat a girlfriend like a gentleman. And that's not because I feel an obligation to do so. It's because I'm happy to do so. I want to. So that's just my own stance. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some MRAs are very hard line about this, and they're like, um, a woman should absolutely, like, they're completely against the notion of any sort of romantic protective instinct whatsoever. And I think that's a little bit boring and a little bit, you know. There are issues like, for example, an expectation that a man pays for everything. I don't agree with that. And I think it's also a cultural thing. There are some cultures where that's still very much the expectation. I know, for example, in Chinese culture, there's a huge amount of pressure on young men to be always financially stable and always paying for the girl. I have noticed that. Anyway, I've spoken for long enough. Let me know your thoughts on this. Thank you for watching.